Hello and welcome to CVR News Network. You're watching CVR English and these are the details of the world 360 with me, Sandeep. In a powerful show of diplomatic unity, US President Donald Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy stood shoulder to shoulder with top European leaders at the White House. The group included UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, French President Emmanuel Macron, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, Finnish President Alexander Stubb, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. The photo taken in the Grand Foyer preceded high-stakes talks aimed at ending the war in Ukraine and securing long-term peace. The gathering followed Trump's summit with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Alaska and marked a pivotal moment in shaping the next phase of negotiations.
That was not a great day. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Hello, everybody. Now understand. Ursula. Not a good day. That was not a great day. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy following high-stake talks in Washington, D.C. with US President Donald Trump and several European leaders emphasized that territorial issues would be handled directly between him and Russian President Vladimir Putin. The question of territory is one we will keep between me and Putin, Zelenskyy told reporters outside the White House. He also urged the United States to send a clear signal of its commitment to Ukraine's security guarantees, which are expected to be formalized within 10 days. The meeting marked a pivotal moment in shaping the next phase of negotiations towards ending the war.
Країн, які будуть допомагати, координувати, а також будуть учасниками гарантій безпеки для України. Я вважаю, що це великий крок вперед. Я не можу поки що сказати, як буде, всіх деталей, але це вже важливо, що є політична воля і є політичне рішення. Дуже добре розбираючись в кожному нашому квадратному кілометрі, залитому, вибачте, кров'ю наших бійців. І для мене це дуже чутливий момент. Я хотів про це. Мені здається, що президент почув і бачив це, і ми були різні моменти, але це важлива інформація. І тому питання територій це питання, яке ми залишимо між мною і країною.
China has agreed to lift export restrictions on fertilizers, rare earth minerals and tunnel boring machines, three critical items for India's agricultural and infrastructure sectors. The breakthrough followed talks between Indian External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar and Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi. who assured that shipments have already begun. These curbs had previously disrupted supply chains, affecting crop yields and delaying major infrastructure projects. The move signals a thaw in bilateral tensions and affected efforts to normalize trade ties following troop disengagement along the line of actual control. It seems as a strategic win for India amid shifting global trade dynamics. French President Emmanuel Macron confirmed that the meeting between Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy and Russian President Vladimir Putin has been agreed upon, with Geneva being proposed as a neutral venue. Macron emphasized that if Russia stalls the peace process, US President Donald Trump is prepared to impose sanctions. The announcement followed a high-level talks in Washington where Macron, Zelenskyy, Trump and other European leaders discussed security guarantees for Ukraine and the next step towards ending the war. Macron said that Ukraine alone will decide on any territorial concessions, warning against legitimizing the land grabs by force.
Readiness to impose what he calls primary and secondary tariffs, but which we, in fact, call sanctions. You have an American president, European presidents, and a Ukrainian president all wanting peace. For my part, I have the greatest doubts about the reality of a desire for peace on the part of the Russian president, because as long as he thinks he can win through war, he will do so, and his ultimate objective is to take as much as territory as possible to weaken Ukraine and to have a Ukraine that is not viable alone or is within the Russian fold. Readiness to impose what he calls primary and secondary tariffs, but which we, in fact, call sanctions. You have an American president, European presidents, and a Ukrainian president all wanting peace. For my part, I have the greatest doubts about the reality of a desire for peace on the part of the Russian president, because as long as he thinks he can win through war, he will do so, and his ultimate objective is to take as much as territory as possible to weaken Ukraine and to have a Ukraine that is not viable alone or is within the Russian fold.
British Prime Minister Keir Starmer described the recent high-level talks between Donald Trump, Volodymyr Zelenskyy and European leaders as a good and constructive, emphasizing a united front in support of Ukraine's security and sovereignty. Starmer welcomed Zelenskyy to London ahead of the summit and reiterated that Europe's commitment to Ukraine remains unwavering. With robust security guarantees being a key priority, he also praised Trump's effort to send the conflict, saying they have brought the international community closer than ever before to ending Russia's war in Ukraine. Starmer warned that any peace process must include Zelenskyy directly and that Ukraine alone should decide its future including territorial matters.
Trump and President Zelenskyy. And we had two material outcomes. The first, on the question of security guarantees, was the agreement that the coalition of willing countries, that's 30 countries already working together on security guarantees, will now work with the US on those guarantees, coordinating. The other material outcome was the agreement that will now be a bilateral agreement between President Putin and President Zelenskyy. That was after a phone call between President Trump and President Putin during the course of this afternoon, followed by a trilateral, which will then add in President Trump. And that is a recognition of the principle that on some of these issues, whether it's territory or the exchange of prisoners, or the very serious issue of the return of the children, that is something where Ukraine must be at the table. And so these were the two outcomes that were the most important coming out of today. They're positive outcomes. There was real sense of unity. We've made real progress today. Thank you very much. And President Trump.
Hong Kong media tycoon Jimmy Lai's landmark national security trial has reached its final phase, with prosecutors delivering closing arguments in a case that could result in life imprisonment. Lai, founder of the new defect pro-democracy newspaper Rappel Daily, is charged with colluding with foreign forces and publishing seditious materials under the Beijing sweeping national security law. The trial, spanning nearly 150 days, has drawn international attention as a litmus test for the civil liberties in Hong Kong. A verdict date remains uncertain. Flood survivors in Pakistan's Bunair district have condemned the government's delayed response and failure to issue timely evacuation alerts after torrential rains and cloudbursts triggered deadly flooding and landslides. Over 270 people have died, with many still missing as rescue teams search through the rubble. Officials claim the intensity of the downpour has overwhelmed forecasting systems. The disaster has sparked national outrage and renewed scrutiny of Pakistan's emergency preparedness.
I am an old man living in a small rented house. When the flood came, it brought so much sand and mud that it swallowed everything I owned. Now I'm worried and wondering how I will be cleaning it. I have no resources, no strength left, and no one has come to help.
Everywhere you look, it's sludge of sand and clay. Most residents were able to evacuate with just the clothes on their back. Although they have been living along the embankment of this natural storm water drain, running through the city for generations, they say they never saw
help, as all our family members are stranded and are in distress without food, water, and even clothes, as nothing is left behind.
Hundreds of families remain without food and water. Even though local volunteers are providing help, it is not enough.
There is massive destruction from the recent floods. In Bunair, lives have been lost, while in Swat, the devastation is financial. Almost 450 households left in ruins. Families here feel abandoned, and are in desperate need of help. I urge all key stakeholders and anyone who can to step forward and support these people who have lost everything.
These people have lost their life savings with no other help in sight. Hope the government will act to put them back on their feet again. Kamal Haider,
areas of Buner and Swat and Shangla districts. So that is the situation. And it doesn't end here. You will find human losses, and there are so many families where you will find only sole missing person, still people are missing, and families are not knowing about them, that where they are. And communities as well as government is trying their level best that to find those missing ones. And dead bodies are still under the giant boulders and these debris and rubble. And it's very difficult task to take them out from this rubble, because that calamity has happened up in the mountainous areas where access is quite difficult, and taking machinery to just dig and take these people out is itself a challenge. I can share with you about our teams which are operating at this moment in these areas. So accessing these mountainous areas where road infrastructure is completely damaged is quite difficult. So they are going on foot, and at some places they are using even animal traction so that they can reach to those places where no one has reached. So that is the situation, and needs are extremely huge. So it's human loss. Excuse me, I'm there.
Yes. As we heard in the story, there's been a lot of criticism from people in those affected areas that the government, that authorities, first of all, didn't give enough warning and then have not done anything to help them. Are those criticisms valid?
Yeah, so I can share with you, particularly there is limitation to prediction of particularly cloud burst which has happened, and the frequency of cloud burst in these areas has drastically increased, particularly in current monsoon season. Previously, we have witnessed this very rarely, particularly in flush 2010 and flush 2015. So in this monsoon season, you can find it in all northern areas of Pakistan. So that is the situation. And when it comes to prediction or forecasting, so forecasting has limitations when it comes to cloud burst. So that is one thing. And in terms of support, again, that whole calamity and catastrophe has happened in very difficult to reach or hard to reach areas. Still, we are on the ground, and we are seeing that government is coming forward, but it is stretched to its limits. And government in these areas, hasn't got these all machineries at hand.
Begoña Gomez, the wife of Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez, has been formally charged with corruption and influence peddling, a development that has stirred significant political tension across Spain. The charges originate from complaint filed by far-right linked anti-corruption group, prompting a judicial investigation earlier this year. Although initial reports from Spain's civil guard found no evidence of wrongdoing, the court has nonetheless scheduled a hearing for July 5th. The case has reignited fierce debate within the political landscape, with Sanchez previously pausing his public duties and contemplating resignation in response to what he described as a smear campaign targeting his family. Members of his government have denounced the investigation as politically motivated, warning that it could undermine democratic institutions and public trust. Russia launched one of its deadliest aerial assaults in recent weeks, killing at least 15 people and injuring over 76 across Kharkiv, Donetsk and Zaporozhye. In Kharkiv, a drone strike on residential building claimed the lives of 7 civilians, including 2 children. Zaporozhye was hit by missile and glide bomb attacks that killed 3 and wounded 30, damaging schools, homes and public infrastructure. The strikes coincided with President Zelensky's arrival in Washington for high-stakes talks with President Trump, prompting accusations that Moscow is deliberately undermining peace efforts. Spain is battling its worst wildfires on record, which have now reached the southern slopes of Picos de Europa mountains. Fueled a relentless 16-day heatwave, fires have scorched over 344,000 hectares and forced authorities to close a 50-kilometer stretch of the historic Camino de Santiago pilgrimage route between Astorga and Ponferrada. Thousands of firefighters and military personnel have been deployed as thick smoke and extreme heat continue to hamper containment efforts. China's construction boom is showing signs of strain as cement production has dropped to its lowest July level since 2009, falling over 5% year on year to around 146 million tons. The decline reflects cheaper issues in the country's real estate and infrastructure sectors, which have been hit by a weak investment and unresolved property crisis. Cement, a key indicator of domestic construction and activity, is now seen as a proxy for China's old economy. Analysts suggest that slowdown marks a structural shift, signaling the end of China's decades-long building frenzy and prompting global markets to reassess demand expectations. That's the end of the bulletin. Keep watching CVR News English.